I never imagined that something as simple as a cookie could tether me to the world in the years after I lost my son. My name's Helen Winslow. I'm 72 now, live in a weathered little house on the north edge of Grafton, Nebraska. Population 1,134, if you count dogs. I've lived here most of my life, and for the last 15 years, I've lived here alone. My husband, Marvin, passed from lymphoma in '08. He was my high school sweetheart, a quiet man who wore his loyalty like a second skin. He served in Vietnam, came home with a limp and nightmares, but he always came home. That's more than I can say for my boy Jesse. Jesse followed in his father's footsteps, joined the Army at 18. Said he wanted to stand where Dad once stood and do it better. Lord, he had his father's steady eyes and my temper. He was 26 when his convoy was hit outside Kandahar. He'd written me a letter 2 days earlier. It was still in transit when the knock came to the door. The Army chaplain said my son died, trying to pull his buddy from the wreck. That sounded like Jesse, always trying to fix the world with his bare hands. After that, well, things got quiet in the house. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't settle, just circles like a hawk overhead. I retired from my job as a reading teacher the year after. Couldn't stand the empty desks in room 4B anymore. And the laughter of second graders, God bless them, felt like a reminder of things I'd never get back. So I started baking. Now, I've always been known in Grafton for my molasses crinkles and my pecan sandies. Won the county bake-off 7 years straight back in the '90s. People would joke that I dusted flour on my pillowcases. But after Jesse died, it wasn't about blue ribbons anymore. It was about having something, anything, to keep my hands from shaking. One winter evening in 2017, I was watching the 6 o'clock news, cradling my tea like it could warm the ache in my chest. The anchor was covering a story about troops stationed near Aleppo. A young soldier on-screen grinned and said he missed his mom's oatmeal cookies. That grin, it had Jesse's shape. Same teeth. Same way the eyes folded into the smile like it hurt just a little. I started crying right there in the recliner. Couldn't even taste the tea. The next morning, I got up before the frost melted and made 3 dozen oatmeal cookies, Jesse's favorite, with butterscotch chips instead of raisins because raisins, in his words, were the devil's fruit. I wrapped them up in wax paper, stuffed them in a tin with a little note, "Stay safe." From one mom to another's kid. Helen W. Then I took it to the post office and asked where I could send them. The clerk, a young woman with a buzz cut and a tattoo of a sunflower on her wrist, looked a little surprised. Fort Dawson's the closest, she said, clicking her keyboard. About an hour east. I can give you the address. I nodded, paid the shipping without flinching. I still remember how light that tin felt in my arms and how heavy my chest felt as I walked out into the cold. No one wrote back. No thank you card. No call. Not that I expected it. But the next Friday, I baked again. Then the Friday after that. Week by week, I added a new tin. Snickerdoodles. Peanut butter. Ginger snaps. Every one wrapped in wax paper, sealed with a ribbon, and accompanied by a handwritten note. For whoever needs a piece of home this week. From someone who once waited too. Some folks started to notice. That's when the whispers began. Old Helen's gone off the deep end. They'd say down at Marcy's Diner. Sending cookies to folks who don't even know she exists. Even Debbie, the postal clerk, started raising her eyebrows when I dropped off the tins. "No one's writing back, huh?" she asked one day. I just smiled. "That's not why I send him, sweetheart." By the second year, it was habit. My Friday ritual. My new liturgy. No blizzard stopped me. No fever. Not even the lockdown in 2020 when the post office switched to limited hours. I'd stand outside in the snow, a box of cookies tucked under my arm, waiting for Debbie to crack open the side door. I never told anyone about the real reason. Never mentioned Jesse by name. But every package was a prayer whispered in butter and flour. A quiet promise that someone out there was still remembered. And I kept sending them. Week after week. For 8 years. To be continued. It was a Thursday night in late October, just before the frost really starts to claim Nebraska, when my hands finally betrayed me. The arthritis, which had been creeping in like a slow fog for years, decided that night it wanted to make a scene. I sat at my little kitchen table, the note card in front of me, pen poised. But when I tried to write, the pen slipped right out of my fingers. The ink streaked across the paper like a smudge of grief. I stared at it for a long moment, rubbing my swollen knuckles, debating whether I should tear it up and start fresh. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the ache in my joints, or maybe I was just tired of pretending Jesse hadn't been the reason all along. So I added a line beneath the smudge. My son loved these before he fell in Afghanistan. HW. That box didn't go to Fort Dawson. It ended up traveling through half a dozen sorting centers, rerouted through military channels, and eventually landing somewhere I never imagined. A place called Forward Operating Base Huron, near Erbil in northern Iraq. Captain Thomas Keller had been serving his third tour. He was a lean man, built like a question mark, always carrying the weight of decisions that don't have clean answers. That day, he'd lost 2 of his men in a roadside bombing. He was sitting in his bunk that night, the base generator humming overhead, when someone dropped the cookie tin onto his cot with a muttered, "Care package, sir." At first, he didn't even open it, just stared at the return label from Helen W., Grafton, Nebraska. But then he noticed the note. My son loved these before he fell in Afghanistan. Keller froze. 8 years ago, back when he was just a green second lieutenant, he'd served alongside a private named Jesse Winslow. Kid had freckles, a sarcastic streak, and the kind of loyalty that made you believe in good again. Jesse had died saving 2 of his squad mates, Keller among them, by spotting the IED first and screaming a warning before it tore their convoy apart. The last words Keller remembered Jesse saying were about cookies. He was delirious, bleeding badly, waiting for the Black Hawk to lift him out. He'd gripped Keller's sleeve and said, "My mom's gonna send cookies. You guys'll love him. Snickerdoodles, best in the Midwest." When Keller read the note, he sat back hard on his cot, the tin open in his lap. The cookies inside were a little crumbled from their long journey, but they still smelled like butter and cinnamon. The smell hit him like a brick wall. He didn't eat one. Not that night. Instead, he spent hours going through old digital photos from their deployment. Grainy, sun-bleached shots of Jesse grinning, squinting into desert light, his arms slung around brothers in arms like they were born to be there. That's when Keller realized these weren't just cookies. These were Jesse's promise, delivered 8 years late. The next morning, he called in a favor from someone at Central Command. He wanted to track Helen down, see if she'd sent cookies before. And that's when they found out. She'd sent boxes to Fort Dawson every Friday for 8 straight years. Back in Grafton, I didn't know any of this. I just kept baking. But that week something felt different. Debbie at the post office didn't greet me with her usual skeptical look. She just nodded and said, "Got a good feeling about this one, Mrs. Winslow." I smiled and handed her the package. My hands hurt something fierce, and I'd had to wrap the tins in dish towels to keep from dropping them. But I did it. I always did. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen window, sipping chamomile tea. My cat, Murphy, curled at my feet. I watched the snowflakes begin to fall, soft and quiet like thoughts you can't quite catch. And I wondered, not for the first time, if Jesse would have had kids. If he would have taught them how to make my molasses crinkles. If he'd have gone gray early like Marvin or stayed a redhead all his life. Then I heard a knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I shuffled to the door, pulling my cardigan tight, and found a man in uniform standing on my porch. Not dress blues, combat fatigues. Dusty, travel-worn, with the name Keller stitched above the pocket. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand and a small, battered box in the other. "Mrs. Winslow?" he asked. I nodded. "I served with Jesse. May I come in?" I stepped aside, heart pounding in my chest. Some moments split your life clean in two, before and after. That knock, that soldier, was the end of 8 years of silence, and the beginning of something else. To be continued. Captain Keller didn't speak right away. He stood just inside my doorway, shifting his weight like the floorboards might not hold him. He looked around my little home, crocheted blankets, black and white photos on the walls, the ancient cuckoo clock Jesse had always found hilarious, and something in his expression softened. "I didn't think this place would look so much like him," he said finally. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee." He nodded, and we sat across from each other, 2 strangers joined by a memory neither of us could let go of. I poured 2 mugs, added cream to his because that's how Marvin used to take it, and waited. Keller pulled the folded paper from his breast pocket. It was the note I'd tucked into the cookie tin, the one with the ink smudge. He slid it across the table without a word, like returning a family heirloom. Then he opened the box. Inside was something I hadn't seen in 15 years. Jesse's unit patch, a worn fabric rectangle with edges frayed from desert wind. And beneath it, a round bronze token I recognized instantly, his challenge coin, the one he'd kept on his nightstand every time he came home. I thought they'd lost his personal effects, I whispered, my throat tight. They did, Keller said. But this, he gave it to me before he died. Told me to keep it safe. Said, give this back to my mom if anything happens. And he paused, voice cracking, I couldn't. Not for a long time. We sat there in silence, the ticking of the old clock marking every heartbeat. Keller's hands trembled as he pushed the box toward me. I've eaten your cookies more times than I can count, he said with a strained smile. Didn't even know it until I read your note. You kept sending them, week after week. They'd show up in the weirdest places. We thought it was some kind of divine intervention. I laughed, a small sound, more breath than joy. No angel wings on this baker, Captain. Just arthritis and a stubborn streak. He smiled back, and for a moment, he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a boy who had lost a friend. I just wanted to make sure someone remembered Jesse, I said. That he wasn't erased. You did more than that, Mrs. Winslow. You kept his promise. I frowned. Promise. Keller nodded. The day before the explosion, Jesse said when he got home, he was going to have you bake for the whole unit. Said we didn't know what real cookies tasted like. He promised us a batch of snickerdoodles that'd make grown men weep. I smiled, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. That boy always did talk too big. Keller pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. I want to show you something. He turned the phone toward me, revealing a photo. A group of soldiers, dusty and tired, grinning like kids. Every one of them holding a cookie. Some had crumbs on their faces. Some raised the tins like trophies. And in the middle, someone had written in Sharpie on the lid, Jesse Winslow delivers. They started calling them Winslow boxes, Keller said. No one knew where they came from, just that they showed up like clockwork. After firefights. After funerals. Holidays. Your cookies kept us grounded. They reminded us we weren't forgotten. I sat there stunned, the weight of his words pressing against every quiet moment I'd spent baking alone in my kitchen. All those tins I thought vanished into the void, they had names. Faces. Hearts that beat just a little steadier because of a snickerdoodle. Doesn't feel like enough, I whispered. It's more than most ever do, Keller said. More than many can. We talked for hours. He told me about Jesse's last days, about the men he'd saved, about the little things, how Jesse used to hum off-key during night patrols, how he always shared his care packages, how he gave away his extra socks to a recruit with blistered feet. I told Keller about Jesse as a boy, how he used to sneak dough from the bowl and pretend it wasn't him, how he wore his Cub Scout uniform to bed for a week straight, how he once sold lemonade to raise money for a stray dog's vet bill. By the time Keller left, it was dark. The snow had started again, dusting his boots as he stepped off the porch. He turned back once. I think Jesse would have been proud, he said. I nodded, unable to speak. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me in the warm glow of my kitchen, holding the challenge coin to my chest. It wasn't closure. Not really. But it was something I hadn't had in years. Connection. Truth. Recognition that grief carried across oceans and still found its way home. The next Friday, I baked 5 tins. Because Jesse had made a promise. And I had kept it. To be continued. I didn't tell anyone in Grafton about Captain Keller's visit. Not the folks at church, not the women in my knitting circle, not even Debbie at the post office who'd come to expect my weekly drop-offs like sunrise. Some things are too sacred to pass around like gossip over pie and coffee. But something changed after that night. Not just in me, but around me. See, I'd always been a quiet kind of presence in town. The kind people nod at in the grocery store but don't really ask about. Marvin and I weren't the sort to join committees or throw block parties. And Jesse had been gone so long most folks only remembered him in bits and pieces, that Winslow boy with the ginger hair, they'd say, like describing a dream they'd half forgotten. But then the blog post happened. Someone, I still don't know who, snapped a photo of me at the post office, carefully arranging tins on the counter like I always did. The picture wasn't unkind on its own, but the caption that showed up online sure was. Local widow appoints herself cookie mom for military, sends unsolicited sweets weekly, craving purpose or attention. I didn't even know it had gone up until my niece Trisha called me from Lincoln, voice sharp with indignation. And Helen, she said, don't you dare read the comments. So of course I did. Folks I didn't even know weighed in with all sorts of opinions. This is performative patriotism. Bet she's just trying to get on the news. Who even eats cookies from strangers anymore? Sounds creepy. Some were worse. Crueler. Anonymous, naturally. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat in my kitchen, laptop closed, staring out the window while Murphy wound himself around my ankles, purring like he could ward off the world. The next morning at the hardware store, when I asked for vanilla extract, the clerk, a new kid I didn't recognize, looked uneasy. We're out, he said, not meeting my eye. You might try ordering it online. It was the way he said it. Like I was something to be avoided. Like kindness could be contagious and dangerous. Even at church, the air changed. People didn't stop speaking to me. They just stopped engaging. I'd sit in my usual pew, feel the rustle of silence around me during fellowship time. No one asked how the cookie project was going. No one offered to help. That week, I baked anyway. But my hand shook more than usual, and I had to sit down twice just to finish wrapping the tins. I told myself it was the weather, the early snow, the strain. But really, it was the hurt. The kind that seeps into your bones when you realize good intentions aren't always met with kindness. On Sunday, Jenny, my grandniece, home from college, stopped by. She found me at the kitchen table with a mixing bowl in front of me and a blank stare stuck on my face. I saw that post, she said, not dancing around it. It's garbage. I shrugged. People are allowed their opinions, but they don't know the truth. They don't need to, I said, folding molasses into brown sugar. This was never for them. Jenny was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about stopping?" I looked down at the dough, watched it pull together in thick amber strands. Every week, I said honestly. Every single week. Especially when my hands hurt or the memories come too sharp. She reached across the table and laid her hand over mine. Then why don't you? I met her eyes and smiled. Because Jesse's not coming back. But the boy's still out there. They deserve to feel like someone remembers. That Friday, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a plain white envelope, smudged at the corners, slipped into my mailbox between the electric bill and a coupon flyer. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. Mrs. Winslow. I served with your son in Afghanistan. Last week, I almost ended my own life. Then your cookies arrived. They reminded me that someone still cares. I asked for help. I'm still here because of you. Please never stop. A grateful soldier. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not the kind of cry you hide behind tissue or smiles. The kind that comes from your soul finally being seen. I didn't show that letter to anyone. Didn't frame it or post it or parade it around town like a trophy. I just folded it carefully and placed it inside Jesse's memory box, right beside his last birthday card and the kindergarten art project he once made that said, "I love my mom more than dinosaurs." Later that day, I added something new to the box, an old Marine Corps pin I hadn't seen in years, wrapped in a cloth handkerchief and tucked in like it belonged there. And that night, I baked. Because one letter, just one, was more than enough. To be continued. The snow had barely started sticking, and already the cold was worming its way into my joints like it had keys to every door. November had arrived in Nebraska with its usual attitude, gray skies, bone-deep chill, and mornings that made me curse the idea of linoleum floors. But that Friday, I still got up before dawn like always. Ritual keeps the darkness from settling too heavy on the soul. I made my usual tea, ginger to quiet the old cough, and stared out the window as the horizon glowed faint orange. Murphy jumped onto the counter, a habit I've never managed to break, and stared at me like he was waiting for me to quit. Not today, I told him, cracking eggs into the old green bowl. We got soldiers to feed. It took most of the morning to finish the batches, 2 tins of oatmeal raisin, 1 of molasses, 1 of snickerdoodles, and a final tin with chocolate crinkles for the kids back at Fort Dawson. I tied ribbons around each lid with the steadiness of a prayer. But when I went to lift the first tin toward the front door, something gave in my wrist. The pain flared so hot and sharp I thought for a second I'd been stung. The tin clattered to the floor. Cookies scattered like they'd leapt to their own deaths. I stood there, dumbfounded, as crumbs covered my feet. For the first time in 8 years, I sat down at my kitchen table and thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is when I stop. I didn't hear Jenny come in until she was kneeling beside me, gently brushing cookie bits from my lap. She'd been staying with me for Thanksgiving break, saying it was to help me decorate early, but I knew the truth. She didn't like leaving me alone for the holidays. "Aunt Helen," she said, voice soft. I dropped them, I mumbled. "It's okay." "No, it's not." I snapped, harsher than I meant. "I've never missed a Friday. Not one." She didn't say anything right away, just swept up the broken cookies, careful not to step on the ones still intact. Then she said, Maybe it's time to ask for help. I stared at her, stubborn pride flaring. I don't need. I didn't say you couldn't do it, she interrupted. I said you don't have to do it alone. That stopped me. I looked at her and saw more than a college girl trying to play house for a week. I saw Jesse's eyes. I saw Marvin's quiet resolve. I saw the strength that shows up without being asked. So I let her help. Together we packed what was salvageable. She drove me to the post office that afternoon, her old Honda rattling like it was made of rubber bands and hope. At the counter, Debbie gave me a long look. One part concern, one part curiosity. You okay, Mrs. Winslow? She asked, tapping her pen on the scale. My hands don't think I am, I said, flexing my wrist. But my heart says otherwise. Debbie smiled, but there was something behind her eyes, something I didn't recognize until later. That night, the video surfaced. Someone had filmed me at the post office. I didn't even notice them, just some man in a ball cap, leaning against the wall like he was texting. The video was short, just me lining up the cookie tins on the counter, adjusting a ribbon. You can hear Jenny say something in the background, but her voice is muffled. Then the man filming mutters, "When's the old lady gonna get it? Nobody cares about her cookies anymore." That line echoed across the screen. The video went viral, locally, at first, then on veterans forums, then wider. People online can be cruel, especially when they think you'll never read their words. She's unwell. She's using grief as a brand. Let her rest. Why doesn't someone stop her already? I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open and felt the weight of all those strangers pressing in. The words didn't wound me like you might think. Not directly, but they scraped at the edges of everything I'd built, like maybe the world really had changed, and small acts like mine were nothing but noise now. But Jenny? She lost it. Let me post something, she begged, fingers twitching over the keyboard. Let me tell them who you are. No, I said. You don't defend kindness with noise. You defend it by doing more of it. So the next Friday, we baked double. The arthritis stayed, of course. It always does. But I found new ways to move, new tools to ease the pressure. And Jenny started coming every week. She called it cookie camp. Then the real surprise came. Tuesday morning, just as I was peeling apples for a pie, I heard it. A deep, rhythmic thump in the distance. Not thunder. Not snowplows. Helicopters. Murphy bolted beneath the table. Jenny screamed from the porch, "Aunt Helen, you need to see this." I stepped outside and nearly dropped my apron. A Black Hawk helicopter, an honest-to-God military chopper, was descending into my backyard. My old apple tree swayed from the wind pressure. Cookie tins I'd left to cool on the windowsill clattered to the floor inside. Neighbors poured out of their houses in robes and slippers, jaws dropped. And from that helicopter, 6 soldiers in dress uniforms stepped out. Every move crisp, coordinated, and unreal. One of them was Captain Keller. He carried something under his arm, a wooden plaque. And he walked straight toward me, eyes glistening. "Mrs. Winslow," he said, coming to a halt. "May we have a word?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, the cold forgotten, the weight of every Friday resting now not on my shoulders, but lifted in ways I could never have imagined. To be continued. Captain Keller stood at the edge of my porch, back straight, eyes glassy. "Ma'am," he said, "I was the last man your son saved." Behind him, the other soldiers stood in formation, their uniforms crisp against the soft swirl of snow. Each held something, folded flags, framed photos, boxes tied with string. The neighborhood was silent. Even the birds seemed to know this wasn't a morning for ordinary sounds. Keller cleared his throat. "For 8 years, your cookies made their way into hands that needed them. What you couldn't have known, what we didn't even realize at first, is that they reached Jesse's old unit. Over and over again." I gripped the porch railing. He went on. "Last year, I received a package from you. It had a note. You mentioned your son. That's when I realized those cookies weren't just cookies. They were his promise. I barely managed a whisper. He promised he'd bring them home." Keller nodded. "And thanks to you, he did." He handed me the plaque. Simple, wood carved, with a bronze plate. "Helen Winslow, in honor of unwavering support for U.S. troops. 2015 to 2023. "It's not official," he said. "It's something greater. It's from us, 3,000 soldiers who've tasted your kindness, who felt remembered because of you." One of the soldiers opened a large leather-bound book and placed it in my hands. It was filled with letters, real letters. Dozens of pages, signatures, even drawings. A soldier named Alvarez wrote, "Your cookies saved me from the worst Christmas of my life." Another, "I've never tasted home until I bit into one of yours." I couldn't speak. Keller reached into his coat and pulled out Jesse's patch again. He promised us snickerdoodles. He kept that promise through you. I pressed the patch to my chest, my heart beating so loud I was sure the whole town could hear. Behind Keller, I saw people I hadn't spoken to in months. Debbie from the post office, Martha from church, even Peter from the hardware store. They all stood silent, humbled. Martha was crying. Keller took a step back and saluted me. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "thank you for your service." I couldn't salute back. My hands were shaking too much. But I nodded. Then I said the only thing I could. "Do any of you boys want cookies?" I just pulled a batch out before the yard got complicated. Laughter broke the tension. They followed me into the kitchen. And just like that, the quiet woman with the cookie tins became something else in Grafton. Not a ghost from a grief-filled house. Not a woman stuck in the past. But a mother who kept a promise the world had forgotten. To be continued. The next day, my street looked like a parade route. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped by, bringing casseroles and awkward apologies. A group of kids from Grafton High came to help shovel the sidewalk. One even brought a tin of store-bought cookies. I didn't have the heart to tell him they were dry as chalk. I didn't need the recognition. But something had shifted quietly, like snow melting underfoot. The same town that had once looked through me now looked at me. Not out of pity, but with something closer to respect. And not just because of the helicopter. It was the letters. The photos. The truth laid out in that thick leather book. Turns out, kindness leaves a trail, even if you never look back. That Sunday, Pastor Jim asked me to speak at church. I said no, of course. I don't like microphones and I never trusted my knees on raised platforms, but I did let him read one of the letters. The one from a young woman in Djibouti who wrote, "My mom died before I deployed, but your cookies reminded me of her." Every bite felt like a hug. The whole sanctuary was silent when he finished. After the service, the ladies from the church committee, the same ones who'd once looked away when I passed the donation basket, lined up to ask how they could help. "We'd like to start a baking circle," one said. "We could call it Helen's Hands," another chimed in. I smiled politely and said I'd think about it. But I wasn't ready to hand it off, not yet. That week, the town high school offered me their industrial kitchen to use on Fridays. More counter space, better mixers, and ovens that didn't wheeze like my old Maytag. Jenny helped me set it up. By noon, we had 15 tins packed and sealed. Every Friday after that, I baked surrounded by volunteers, students, retired folks, even Peter from the hardware store. He brought the vanilla himself. And the letters kept coming. Not all from soldiers, some from moms, some from people who'd lost someone, some from folks who just needed to believe the world still had soft places left. But one letter stood out. It was from a young man stationed in Poland. He'd never met Jesse, never been to Grafton, but he'd gotten one of my boxes during a rough week. He wrote, "You'll never know me, and that's okay, but your cookies reminded me that someone, somewhere, gives a damn." That kept me going. "Thank you, Mrs. Winslow. You saved more than you know." That night, as I tucked the letter into Jesse's memory box, I whispered, "We did it, baby. We really did." To be continued. Word of what happened in my backyard traveled farther than I thought possible. A national morning show called. Twice. A reporter from the Lincoln Sentinel showed up at my door with a camera and questions. I turned them all down. I didn't do this for cameras, I told Jenny. And I'm not starting now. But the story had a life of its own. One morning, I found a package on my porch. Inside, a tin of Belgian chocolate, a handwritten note from a soldier's parents in Antwerp, and a photo of their son holding one of my cookie tins, beaming like it was Christmas morning. Grafton changed, too. At Oak Hollow Elementary, where I'd taught second grade for decades, they started something new, Camp Kindness Day. Once a year, the kids bake cookies and deliver them around town, to the nursing home, the fire station, even the post office. Little Lily Peterson, who once called me the weird cookie lady, handed me a plate herself last week. "You were right," she said. "Cookies really do something." The church put up a small plaque behind the building near the Rose Garden. Bronze, simple, elegant. It reads, "The Winslow Cookie Ministry. Because love travels farther than we know." Back home, I cleaned out an old sewing box and turned it into a memory chest. It's full now, patches, medals, photos, challenge coins. Pieces of lives touched by flower and faith. Jesse's original flag still sits on the mantle, but now it's joined by a second one, sent from a base in Iraq where my cookies showed up on Christmas Eve. Funny thing is, people keep asking me now, do you ever wish the recognition had come sooner? And I always answer the same way. The cookies were never about me. They were about Jesse. And the ones still out there in boots and helmets who need to feel like someone's waiting for them. That quiet Friday ritual, that act of remembering, it outgrew my kitchen. It found its way into classrooms, living rooms, and base camps around the world. And me? I keep baking, arthritis and all, because some promises don't expire. To be continued. The first snow of December came in heavy that year, and with it, a stillness that settled deep in my bones. Not a sadness, just the kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes and you realize you're still standing. That Friday, I baked a smaller batch. Just 3 tins. My hands wouldn't allow much more, but I didn't feel guilty. Jesse would have told me to rest, maybe even teased me for overdoing it. But I had one last thing to do before Christmas. Jenny helped me package the tins and drive them across town. But instead of the post office, we stopped at the local VA clinic. We walked inside, past tired faces and long waits, and left the cookies with the receptionist, a young man who looked surprised when I told him what they were. Just cookies, he asked. Just cookies, I said, smiling. And maybe a little hope. On the way home, Jenny asked me something I hadn't been expecting. What would you want people to remember about you and Helen? I thought about that. Thought about how loud the world had gotten in recent years and how easy it was to miss the quiet ones. Then I said that I kept going when no one noticed, that I loved in silence. Jenny nodded like she understood. And maybe she did. That night, I sat in the living room with the fireplace on low, Murphy curled against my hip, and the memory box open on my lap. I pulled out a photo, one of Jesse, about age 10, missing a front tooth, holding a lumpy snickerdoodle like it was gold. I whispered, "We made it, kiddo." We really did. Later, I found myself writing one more note. Not for a soldier, but for Jenny. I tucked it inside a recipe card box and placed it in the drawer with the mixing bowls. It read, "When I'm gone, don't keep baking because you think you have to. Do it because someone, somewhere, needs to feel remembered. Love is a lot like dough. It rises best with a little warmth." And Helen, to be continued. It's strange how life circles back. One Friday in early spring, I woke up and realized it had been exactly 9 years since I sent the first box to Fort Dawson. 9 years of ribbons, stamps, flour, and silence until the silence broke wide open, and the echoes came back carrying names I never knew. That morning, I baked my smallest batch yet. A dozen snickerdoodles, no more. My hands were too swollen to hold the dough for long, and I had to rest twice just tying the tin shut. Jenny sat beside me in the kitchen, watching the oven light glow. "I think this is the last one," I said quietly. She didn't argue. She just nodded and squeezed my hand. We drove together to the post office. Debbie met us at the counter with tears in her eyes. "I saved the last tracking slip for you," she said. On the way home, we didn't talk much. Just listened to the wind and the tires on the old highway. But I felt lighter, somehow. Like a season had closed. That Sunday, the church held a quiet ceremony in the Rose Garden. A few soldiers came back, Captain Keller among them. He brought his daughter this time. She handed me a drawing, a cookie with angel wings. "I never met your son," she said, "but I know he was good. Because you are." I didn't cry then. I waited until I got home and placed the drawing inside Jesse's memory box, beside the patch, the coin, and all the letters that had once saved me more than I'd saved them. Now the box sits on a shelf above the stove. I still bake sometimes, birthdays, Sundays, the occasional batch for the VA. But the weekly ritual, the tin on the counter, the post office visits, those I've passed on. To Jenny, she started her own mailing list. Has friends from college helping. And she calls it the Winslow Promise. A few months ago, she showed me a message she received from a young soldier overseas. The cookies tasted like someone missed me. I hadn't felt that in a while. I didn't need to say anything. I just nodded and went back to stirring the batter. These days, people still ask about the Black Hawk landing, about the plaque, about the sudden burst of attention that turned a small-town woman into something larger than she ever meant to be. But I don't talk about that much. I talk about Jesse, about the days we spent baking when he was a kid, about how love doesn't stop just because someone's gone. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I like to sit in the kitchen and imagine the path those cookies took, crossing oceans, deserts, jungles, tiny reminders that someone still cares. Love, I've learned, travels farther than most people think. And kindness? Kindness always finds a way back home.